Good afternoon. Good afternoon. So today, something, I think, just something like relaxing and just talking about, I think, for our daily practice, daily lives. Of course, many of you have to go to work and something like conventional lifestyle. So this is one thing, and one that I think that you have to save time and devote time in that aspect, in those aspects, this conventional, really our one's livelihood connected with that, of course. And then, on the other hand, Dharma, which is, I think, not so which I think, of course, I don't think it is meant to be from the side of something like as if it is a ritual, as if one is supposed to practice Dharma, or one is expected to Dharma. This is not, I don't think that is how Dharma functions. It is not from the viewpoint of, oh, I have to practice Dharma, or I have to do this Dharma activity because I'm expected to, or because this is how it was done in my times, or from my parents' times, or it is, as a Tibetan, I can say it is because it is in my environment. This is the environment that I was brought up in. If I simply engage in these so-called Dharma, labeled as Dharma activities from purely just this viewpoint, then I'm in a sense I'm not really experiencing Dharma. Or my approach to Dharma is really superficial. It's just on the surface. To practice the Dharma, then it is really important to see the purpose, to see the benefits, from this perspective. With this perspective, then engaging in this labeled as Dharma activities, then this gives it meaning to such activities, to our activities. Even something that is very mundane, if we have this, by having this view, by connecting this to the benefit, to the something like this peaceful aspect, this freedom from these coarse emotional thoughts, disturbing thoughts, fluctuations within the mind, if we can function, if our thinking, if we make the effort, and at times maybe we don't need to put so much effort. It is not a question of whether there's enough effort or not. It is not from that side, but something more like changing the perspective, changing the viewpoint, and this self-absorption, with this strong sense of self-absorption, looking from that viewpoint, then sometimes it is difficult to see the complete picture, or it is somehow limiting, looking from the viewpoint of self-grasping, the self-absorption. Even when it comes to wisdoms, let us say something like shunyata, right? The ultimate reality. Looking at it from this strong self-absorption, self-grasping mind, and with perceptions, then this limits in experiencing shunyata, and also, not only with shunyata, but with something more in our daily lives. From this strong sense of self-absorption, then even understanding, for example, the wishes of others or the feelings of others, this also self-absorption, this looking from the viewpoint of this self-centeredness, it hinders in really understanding, in feeling, in empathizing, in understanding, in recognizing the viewpoint of the other person, or how the other person is feeling. So the self-absorption, this strong sense of self-absorption, as long as we are thinking from a very firm, from a firm state, in this firm state of self-absorption, without even questioning something like the validity or the authenticity of this ego, the self-cherishing and the self-grasping mind, without even asking any question, without questioning the validity of this, without questioning the power of the self-absorption, then from this viewpoint to even interacting with others in a harmonious way, this can be a hindrance. This can obstruct in our reaching to others, in our being understanding of others. So this self-absorption then very much the teachings of this text, or the teachings of Shantideva, is reminding us about how to overcome that, and why not overcoming that is what got us in this present situation in the first place, right? Of not even questioning this self-centeredness. self-grasping. So, yes, realizing shunyata for the time being, maybe I am not at that level where that should be my primary concern, but rather, first I have to get things in order. I have to get things in order. Something like in how at the level of this conventional lifestyle, conventional behavior, this is where I can take the steps. If I am serious about becoming a Buddha, if that is what I wish to do, then first I have to take these steps, where at least I can make some changes, something like making compromises in my self-centeredness, making compromises with my self-centered thoughts. So for this, something like in our daily practice, then how do we overcome that challenge? How do I, as a practitioner, this wish to be free from suffering, and likewise all other beings also wishing the same, then for the benefit of all sentient beings, including myself, then how do I proceed with, of course, with the precious teachings, with the precious sutras and the precious commentaries? How do I proceed in relation to my conventional lifestyle? In other words, how to balance, right? How to balance these two, the mundane and the supramundane. How to balance this? Sometimes it seems a bit paradoxical, our lifestyle. On the one hand, we have to be in this conventional world, yet we are, through causes and conditions, and of course something like through our social upbringing, our cultures, we have this connection with the Dharma. So there is something like a conflict. There is something like a conflict. Sometimes it seems like there is a conflict, or perhaps a contradiction in this one aspect of having respect and faith in the three jewels, and then on the other side, also wishing for the good things of this life, right? So it may seem contradictory. It may seem contradictory, and how to overcome this? Then this is where I think we can think, we can process how we think, we can process how we take this approach, living this conventional life in accordance with the Dharma, and whether that is really possible or not, right? Whether it is possible or not. On the one hand, I think it mentions somewhere that as long as we don't have something like the wisdom, right? The wisdom of shunyata, and there is no firm renunciation yet, then whatever virtuous deeds we do, except in some extraordinary situations, all these virtuous deeds in this state will then is a seed for future samsara, right? So this really to think, it's, am I, by making so much merit, then am I doing this to just have future samsara, to be in the same situation that I'm currently in? Something like perpetuating samsara, right? So without renunciation and without wisdom, only with under exceptional circumstances. So this is some of this, I think, circumstances refers to, I think, something like through the power of a Buddha. So there are certain circumstances that are exception. Otherwise, then one without any sense of renunciation, without any sense of wisdom of shunyata, then even with a very good intent, those simply would result in the next samsara stage at some point. So to reflect on this, therefore, then renunciation is really not an easy thing to do, to renounce. So then, if I'm not able to renounce, then what do I do, right? What do I do? This is one thing. And then without renunciation, then is compassion, unconditional compassion for all sentient beings. Then is this possible without renunciation? I think the answer is no, right? So without renunciation, then there is no possibility to have unconditional compassion for all sentient beings. Why? In order to have unconditional compassion for sentient beings, not only from the side, actually unconditional compassion for sentient beings is not just an emotional state. It is not when I or someone feels a very strong empathy. That is not unconditional compassion. Compassion in itself, it contains some aspects of wisdom. Compassion comes with wisdom. And here, the wisdom that compassion is based on is knowing that there is a way out of suffering. This is the wisdom of realizing that. And so based on this, then unconditional compassion is based on this. And if one has not renounced, in other words, have not realized dukkha, then there is no possibility for renunciation. So this is, sometimes I get this question nowadays on the news, with the horrific things that are going on around the world, all these casualties of this conflict, really heartbreaking to see, and especially nowadays, I think through social media, sometimes like they show these graphic images, right? And really seeing the intense suffering that one is subjected to. Seeing this, it's sometimes heartbreaking. This is what a few have shared. So when I am thinking in this, how this person is processing this, yes, it is almost unbearable. At that moment, simply being in that emotion, I think I find it rather something like a helpless state, that one cannot do much about that. It may be overwhelming if one simply tries to experience the pain of the other, the suffering of the other. So then here I think it is important to take a few steps back and then put that into perspective. Put this within samsara, the types of sufferings, and how suffering is created by the three mind poisons. Reflecting on this, then I think we come to this point of seeing the causes of this suffering. To this, what I'm saying is that before there was this question of why that in Buddhism there isn't such a strong emphasis on something like engaging socially and building schools and hospitals, things like this. Of course, here in the Buddhist communities here in Asia, this is very strong, that the devotees, they give much of this serving others and are very generous in, of course, helping those who are in need of help. There are, I think, many associations around here that are actively engaging in those, in serving those who needs help, and also providing medical care, and also in terms of education, I think so. Of course, this is one thing that is very much, I think, alive in the communities in this country and also the neighboring countries, that many, and also in the Theravadan traditions, where the people, of course, these are not necessarily monastics, but around the villages, around the towns, they gather together and are so generous in not only making dana offerings to the monastics, but also to those in society who are in need of support. So this is really wonderful. This is, of course, a part of generosity practice. At the same time, then in something like overcoming suffering, then the Buddha, of course, shows the path out of suffering. Yeah? Yes, helping with materials, this is a way of bringing benefit. But this benefit is somewhat temporary. If there is poverty, yes, to help, this is wonderful. But then, rather than simply dispelling poverty with only by giving material goods, then to something like educate, then this is more beneficial, more beneficial. It's something like, I think there's a saying, rather than teaching them something like a means of sustaining themselves, then this is, of course, more meaningful. Similarly, then the Buddha, in his sharing of how to overcome our mental suffering, then this is something like teaching us that, giving us this set of tools in overcoming, and if to overcome this from this state. I don't know what I've said so far. I think, like in the Heart Sutra, one of the disciple goes into this samadhi. Is it like a samadhi? Yeah, and then there's a name of this samadhi, right? Yes, the Buddha goes into this samadhi. Samonawa. Something like the profound. Is it the profound? What is the name of the samadhi at the beginning of Heart Sutra? Samonawa Shechavi Tingize. Profound.
Illumination, absorption.
Oh. Perception. Oh. Yes.
Illumination.
In the Heart Sutra. In the Heart Sutra.
Illumination, absorption.
Illumination, absorption, right? The Buddha is in this state of illumination, absorption. Profound absorption.
In the concentration of the countless aspects of the body called
Profound
illumination.
Illumination, right? Profound illumination. And I was in this absorption of profound nonsense. Yes. Okay, so this sets the stage of how the confused mind is, right? It's just like that. So that was the demonstration of a confused state of mind. Yeah, so in our daily lives, to find a structure, I think is very useful, because when we listen to the Dharma, we hear bits here, we hear bits there, and then if there is a structure, then it would help us. It is more helpful. So I think one way of structuring our daily practice is, of course, I think through the 5 powers, in Lojong, as you're familiar. The 5 powers, the power of determination, the power of familiarization, the power of virtuous deeds, the power of reproach or relinquishment, the power of aspiration. So these are 5 powers. The power of determination, the first, the power of something like intent. To start our day with this thought. The moment you wake up, before checking your phone and jumping into your routine, to establish a strong intention, right? To establish a strong intention. So the thought here is, no matter what happens, whether things go beautifully or fall apart, I will not let go of my practice of compassion and Dharma and awareness. I will not allow my ego clinging and negative emotions to run the show, making this pledge, having this thought, making this being determined, and then choosing. It's really about choosing the person you want to be. right? It really comes down to that. So to make this something like a vow, a promise to yourself in the morning, first thing, then no matter what happens, I will not give in to my emotions. I will not give in to my three mind poisons, but rather I am willing to stand up and set the trajectory of the day. I'm going to set that up, right? This is where you make that firm pledge. And using those words like, I'm not going to give in to the three mind poisons. I'm not going to waver from my commitments to the practices, my commitments. I'm not going to waver from compassion, from awareness, from Dharma, to really make this affirmation first thing in the day. Why it matters is that then it shifts us from being a passive, reactive participant to an active author of our mental state. So to not wait for something to happen, but rather to be prepared and to take the initiative. And to really, and of course, I think this can be applied on many levels to any relevant, to what is most relevant. What is most relevant? You can apply this approach. You can apply it. You can apply it. The power of determination, this propelling intention, everything comes out of intention, out of our wishes. So, in a way, it is really about this innate, spontaneous wish that we have, to wake up to that innate wish, yeah, and not to get up and then in a real muddled state where there is no freshness, yeah. So to really touch base with your innate wish, right? With that wish to be true to yourself, to be being true to oneself, and not something like reacting to the three mind poisons that pops up, that just pops up. The three mind poisons, and they're something like so what's that Sanskrit term? Nirmanakaya, right? Nirmanakaya. What is what is Nirmanakaya? Like emanations, right? Emanations. So the three mind poisons and their emanations. Not to get caught up in that. Not to get caught up in doubts. Not to get caught up in fear, or yes, self-doubt. This is really damaging and hinders. Do not have doubts in yourself. Yeah? So, to say something like verbally or mentally that whatever happens today, that I will be the best person I can be, that I will not give in to obstacles. So to wake up and make a conscious decision, to make a conscious decision about who you want to be, right? So the power of determination, this is, I think, if we get that right, then we are off to a good start. Before the world that we live in has a chance to pull us in a million directions, right? So really, to make this affirmation first thing. And then the power of familiarization. Wisdom isn't something that just appears from nowhere. It has to be nurtured. It has to evolve. It has to evolve. Wisdom evolves. It comes from practice, right? It comes from practice. So habituating oneself, familiarizing oneself. To bring the mind back, for example, to Lojong Tonglen practice or awareness. And if one feels a spike of anger, impatience, or pride, then to immediately apply the antidote, to immediately apply the remedy. And you have to do this when you start feeling the spike. Yeah? To apply that, just as something like, I think it's easier to contain the fire as in the early stages, right? So likewise, then to get perspective, and then with this awareness, then to apply the antidote, to say, okay, I'm going to take a few steps back, right? And then rethink this, reimagine this, and not be rigid. Whatever previous, I will try to look from a different viewpoint. I will not address this situation from the previous state or from the previous viewpoint, but rather I'll look at it from a different viewpoint, sort of something like zooming out, right? Or shifting your perspective, not from necessarily looking from my rigid viewpoint, but also to take into account at that time, during the time that you have shifted a few paces back, maybe whatever it is that is disturbing me, starting to disturb me, I can feel that these disturbing emotions and feelings are on the rise, that they are rising because, and then to think of the causes and conditions, and to look at by taking these few steps back in itself, that is a form of remedy. And to look at it more holistically, then it helps to practice. It helps your practice. It helps in your awareness, practicing awareness, practicing mindfulness. Why am I feeling this? You have to ask. Maybe it's because the other person said this or behaved in this way. Then to say to oneself, that's okay. Yes, for the moment, I cannot change how the person had acted or what the person said. But does the other person really control my mind or control my feelings? To ask this. Yeah? I don't think anybody can control someone else's mind or feelings or emotions. Yes, they can try to be a conditional factor. They can be conditional factors, but the actual cause is your mind, is within you. So we have a choice, right, to repeat that to oneself, that I have a choice in how I react, yeah, and how I see through this emotion. Yes, sometimes these reactions are so they're instantaneous. But it is never too late to realize that one is going through these emotions it is never too late. Because whenever you come to that realization, it is never too late to apply the remedy. So recognizing that there's, whenever you think it's a good time to apply the remedy, that is the best time to apply the remedy, to let go of anger, to let go of a feeling, to let go of fear. So this, to familiarize, to practice, this is a form of practicing. To practice and to also something like experimenting. Today I had this experience, I tried this, okay, it didn't work so well. Then maybe next time as similar circumstances, under similar circumstances, then I will try maybe that tool, right? Maybe I'll try to change something. So there's always this room to something like improvise upon. There's always room to maneuver yourself. There's in this situation, there's always room for that. No, there's no need for being rigid and not moving freely. No one says that is not allowed. No one says that, and no one can force. No one has the right to force. So you, in those feelings, in those spikes of anger, desire, ignorance, hopes and fears, if you find it too intense, too disturbing, overwhelming at times, then to take a few steps back and then apply being aware. So in this familiarization, then here, having this in the mind, whatever I encounter today, this is fuel for my practice. Whatever I encounter today, this is fuel. This sustains my practice. This sustains my practice. And if maybe it's the traffic, maybe it's the boss or one's partner, this kind of external triggers, they are only triggers, but how it triggers us. And sometimes the external triggers, they trigger an emotion in us. But many times, I think how we deal with it afterwards, that is where the most damage is being felt. Yeah? And then after all of that, then we blame everything onto the external triggers. This is not very helpful, blaming external factors. It's not very helpful. Of course, blaming oneself isn't helpful either. So we stop with this blame game. To not blame others and to not blame oneself, and instead to take a more positive approach. So, which is applying the antidote. Yeah, applying the antidote. And to and to do that continuously. So habituation, familiarizing, yeah, to familiarize oneself with this awareness, different ways of looking at the same situation. And each time we change a viewpoint, a point of view, or in each there is a certain benefit. No? So then to play around with this, yeah, something like to experiment. Sometimes from many of these strong spikes of emotions, it's usually, I think, when we are engrossed with ourselves, when we are in self-absorption, when we are centering everything onto the self. That's, I think, the mind state from which we feel all of this intensity, right? So then, to apply the antidote, to broaden the spectrum, to broaden the viewpoint, and not only to step away from really something like to zoom out, to pan out of this narrow-mindedness, right? Self-absorption, and then move towards openness. Being open to the viewpoint of others. This is a wonderful practice and a very helpful, practical way to in our daily lives, not strictly Dharma, right? Like official Dharma, but at one Dharma is, I think, maybe it's not capital Dharma, yeah. But of course, everything is Dharma, but maybe it's not capital Dharma. Not with a capital D. This is very important. When I was speaking about capital D, there were some thoughts that came. So my thoughts went from capital D, Dharma, and then it went from this openness and Dharma, to practice the Dharma is to practice openness. It's really in the Theravadan tradition. It's a wonderful tradition. Wonderful, great teachings are contained in the scriptures, in the Pali tradition. I think before I was talking with some people, and they were making some kind of like a graph, PowerPoint presentation, and they were putting Theravada to something like you know how in the Lamrim we say the path or something like of small capacity, small scope. There's I think such terms. So this is I think wrong. You know, to equate Theravadan tradition with the path of the small scope. This is I think wrong. That is not the case. Theravadan tradition. Of course, I think it means something like the elders, right? The school of the elders. So, in this tradition, for sure, there is bodhicitta in that tradition also. So, if there is bodhicitta, then it's technically not small scope, right? It's not. I just can't stop this thought that's still on the background. I'm almost on the verge of saying that wisdom, compassion, boundless compassion, boundless wisdom. We have to be careful when we sort of use labels, say something like Buddhism, right? Then once I was asking one gathering, do you think it is possible that a non-Buddhist can realize shunyata? Yeah. This is really, I think, an interesting question. Yeah. So someone who is considered a non-Buddhist can realize shunyata. Not can in the sense of after becoming a Buddha in the next lifetime, of course not. But in this lifetime of being a non-Buddhist, whatever that may be, if the answer is yes, then I think it's very interesting to go from this very narrow-minded approach, right? I think you know what I'm referring to. So the power of familiarization. So with this practice, then our natural responses, then they change by continually practicing and familiarizing with ourselves, with our situation. And sometimes we have a problem. The problem is really created in our minds because we are not able to move. We are simply frozen, right? So to be able to move freely and not to move freely from this strong self-centeredness. To do that from time to time and making that a habit. Making that a habit. So this is the power of familiarization. The power, then the third, the power of positive virtue. This is, of course, about deliberately creating the karmic momentum required to sustain our Dharma practice, actively planting seeds of generosity, seeds of ethical conduct, seeds of forbearance, and dedicating that goodness, that positiveness, away from one's self-centeredness. And the practice is quite simple. Doing good deeds. And when you do something helpful, something positive, something virtuous, do not use that to inflate one's self-esteem. Instead, to give that merit to sentient beings, to the benefit of all beings. This is the power of positive virtue. And the core thought here is, may whatever goodness I create go entirely towards easing the suffering of others and dismantling my own self-grasping at the self. Why this matters is that this way of practice, then this will starve off the spiritual ego, the part of us that wants to feel holy, accomplished, or superior because we practice. The spiritual ego. This is one thing to keep in mind. To engage in any positive actions, to not attach oneself, to not attach benefits, to not even think of the benefits. Simply doing that with a good heart, with nothing but wishing the other person to be free from suffering, to be happy, to be at peace, dedicating this action to their peace. This is how it's ought to be done. Of course, in the Lamrim, there are many texts. In other texts, it gives you like the list of benefits. If, for example, if you do this, there is a list of 10s. If you do this, there's a list of 8. This is what you're getting, right? So as far as the list goes, it's quite an impressive list. But then when we are doing our practice, to do away with all those benefits, right? Just do that, just that, practice it in a way so that it's spontaneous, that none of these thoughts arise, and that I think takes practice. And that of course starts with this awareness that especially for those of us who are engaging in virtue, then these thoughts of attaching that particular action to the self can arise. So in this way, something like selfless. Sometimes, so this is why we say to always at the end of this, then this one thing, then to dedicate this to sentient beings, and also, as we say, to apply shunyata. Yeah, to apply shunyata. It doesn't matter whether you have realized or not realized or have attained a certain path. That is not the point. To say, to make this, that the purpose of shunyata is to not give it importance, right? That is the purpose of shunyata, to not give self-importance, The spiritual ego, this is especially for those of us who are officially in the Dharma, in this Dharma business. And spiritual ego it's almost, we are always casting this shadow of the spiritual ego. The power of determination, the power of familiarization, the power of applying positive actions. So now I think we will take a break. Just something that's so disconnected from whatever that we spent the past 1.5 hours on. I remember this was, I think, like around 2001. I was once reading this, maybe it was either Time or Newsweek article on, of course, what was the name of that organization? Al-Qaeda? Al-Qaeda, maybe, yeah. From anyhow, like, so there was this news, there was this article in the magazine, and it was there was a passage about how they would recruit, potential, let us say, suicide bombers, yeah, and Al-Qaeda, yeah, Al-Qaeda, yeah, yeah, and I remember this part that candidates, potential candidates, were invited for an interview, and then they are in this room, and then there is no interviewer, right? They have to wait for the interviewer. And sometimes they would have to wait for hours at an end, and they were in this empty room all by themselves. And of course they had cameras, and then that's where they would study this person while this person was waiting for the interview. It's really interesting. I don't know. It's so disconnected. Maybe it's because I was looking at this screen. If there's any connection, I think the screen must be the connection.